Hopefully everybody can see that clearly and hear me. Look, it's a great privilege to always be sharing knowledge with other teachers. Although I've been doing this for decades, I can't say I have all of the answers, but I'm very happy to help anyone who's in the process of wanting to hire music teachers with any help that I can give. So the first question I think you need to ask yourself if you're considering hiring teachers at this point is why you are considering doing it. And the reason I ask that first up is because it is such a big responsibility to take on other people, be responsible for their income in some degree and their experience in teaching. So you really need to make sure it's something that you are going to give your best to. So what are the most likely reasons you might hire teachers? It might be because you have got too much teaching yourself, or you've got a combination of too much teaching going on and too much admin, and your life-work balance is out of kilter. You'd like to reduce your hours in some capacity without leaving your students high and dry. So that may be a reason for you to decide it's time to hire a teacher to help you with your workload. You might be thinking purely and simply about ways to increase your income, and that means taking on more students with more teachers. It may be that you have a waiting list of students and you really don't want to lose them or let them down, and you're prepared to go that extra mile by taking on the responsibility of hiring teachers and managing those students and teachers within your own music school or music teaching business. Alternately, it might be that you've seen an opportunity. There's an opportunity to expand by offering different instruments or additional sorts of programs. You might even find that you've got an available space. So there might be these triggers that start you thinking about the potential of taking on extra help for the teaching side of it, so that you can provide more programs, more instruments to your students in your area. Or it could be a combination of all of the above, and quite often is. Having made that decision that you want to take on teachers, the next point to really start thinking about is, what is the potential and where do you want to take this potential in hiring teachers? So one of the little systems I put together years and years ago is to do with this music school success ladder, which you can see on the left of your screen. So starting at the lower rung of the ladder is the roadie, and we work up to the chorus line and the one-person show. And these three levels are where you are the only person who is teaching within your business, or you're not even teaching, you're just starting to teach in somebody else's business. And you want to get beyond that. So you want to go from this foundation level, which is you as a solo teacher. You want to move up to what we call the enterprise level, where you are going to grow your team of teachers. So if you look at the three middle levels, the leading man, which I should really change to leading person, the principal and the manager, those roles are where you start to ease out of doing teaching all of the students, and you start to do more administration and more managing of your music school, hence the term manager for the blue one there. When you get above that into the alchemy level, which is, as they say, where the magic happens, that's where you might have multiple music type of businesses, where you have a music school, you have a retail store, you have a composition shop, you have whatever else it might be that you are skilled in. You have multiple music businesses that means that you are not just teaching, you might be composing, you might be conducting, you might be directing, you might be doing whatever those skills allow you to do. And you are no longer just basing your income from being a music teacher. So ultimately, the idea of showing you this is to say that it's really wide open. Once you start hiring one teacher, you can go on and hire multiple teachers, and you can grow your music teaching business to whatever level is going to suit you. Do you want to teach more, or do you want to teach less? Do you want to use multiple locations? Do you want to take on admin staff? And what sort of income are you ultimately trying to achieve? Those sorts of questions will help you to define where you want to get to on this success ladder. And as I've pointed out down the bottom, you'll never achieve your dream if you don't have one. So I believe that before you jump into that melting pot of hiring teachers, that you want to actually clarify why you want to hire teachers and to what degree you're going to go with that dream. Now, I've put a link in here, which is if you want to explore the idea of the Music School Success Ladder. I've got a number of webinars on my website, which is just wendysmusic.com.au, and you can go through those webinars and get a lot more detail on these sorts of ideas. Now, at what point might you consider that you should hire teachers? When you're already out there teaching, perhaps? So most teachers start small with their business. They start out themselves, and they don't even realize they're running a business to start with. They label themselves as a music teacher, not as a business owner. And they have to suddenly learn all of the business aspects and the admin that goes with it. And it's not always something that we love doing. Some of us just want to be doing the teaching. Some of us like organizing, and we like that split of doing both, but it does vary from one person to another. This little chart shows you what I consider to be the 7 different phases that any sort of business, whether it's music teaching or any other sort of business, tends to cycle through. So when you're preparing, you're just really taking stock of what is possible. Then you start to dream and plan when you design exactly what you've dreamt. You build it, you live it for a while, you share it with your network, and then you can get to the point of saying, well, I'm actually ready to expand. And then you go through the process again. Now, the title of this session was to give you some step-by-step guides to how to hire teachers. So here's a quick overview. The 5 most important areas that we need to go through. So preparing yourself is really doing an audit of everything in your life that's going to be impacted upon if you decide to go down this path of hiring teachers. The dreaming and designing part is where you start to actually think beyond that, and you start to really expand your ideas and think, well, even if I had more money than what I currently have, if I had more time than what I currently have, if I had more people in my network who can help me than I currently have, this is what I would really like to have my music school or my music teaching business look like. So it's a bit like having an end game or a goal in mind. So your prepare section is a bit like bringing you down to earth and saying, well, I've only got this available. But your dreaming and designing section is when you really get to just take the lid off and enjoy the ideas. Once you've figured out all of that, then you need to go ahead and start building it. And when it comes to hiring teachers, that means you've got to get down to the nitty-gritty part of specifying exactly how it's going to work. And policies and procedures are the most important things that we need to actually document, because we have to be able to share those with any incoming teachers. The fourth part of hiring teachers is when you actually go through the process of recruiting, hiring, training, managing, and potentially replacing. You might also have to consider relief teachers. So if your teachers that you've hired can't come in on a day or for a week, what are you going to do? Are you going to hire relief teachers or not? So all of these things come into play when you're actually making it happen. And then the last part is, again, if you want to expand on that, you've taken on one teacher, it's all working really well, you've built up another waiting list, or you're starting to have inquiries for another instrument, you've got a new location available, whatever it might be. So you then start a review of how everything's been working and decide how you want to go ahead from there. So now if we look in a little bit more detail at those sections, in the prepare section, we're going to do an audit of exactly what we have available to start off this process of hiring a teacher. So we need to know exactly what we've got in terms of contracts for the legal side or policies. We need to know what funds we've got available for simple things like advertising. We need to know what stock we might have available, what resources of equipment we have available. We need to know what IT we're going to provide for our teachers. We then have to look at the operational side, which is everything admin. And that's quite a large area that you have to consider. And that gets tied back to areas of policies and procedures. In some ways, they're all tied together with policies and procedures, but you want to do a bit of an audit on all of these areas so you know what you have at your fingertips and what you need to then research and figure out and perhaps find more resources, whether that's money, time, or people to help you. In the same way, if you look at your marketing that you might be doing now for getting students for yourself, if you have to get students for another teacher, what resources do you have available for that? How would you go about it? Who's going to be responsible for the hiring of this person? Are you going to be the one who does everything? Or are you going to potentially outsource it? You might have a family member or a partner who can help you with these aspects. And then when it comes to the IP, so that's the intellectual property, there are considerations for curriculum. So when you take on a teacher, there are choices as to what you want them to actually teach. So you need to think about what intellectual property you have that you are going to share with them, or perhaps even what they have to provide. So doing an audit gives you that backdrop of this is what I have now, and you then start to be looking ahead to, but this is what I might need. So in the dreaming and design part, this is the real fun stuff, I think. You let your hair down, you get out your nice bottle of wine or whatever it is that makes you relax and start to get creative. And you start thinking about the who, what, when, where, and why. So if we start at the top left here, who is your ideal teacher? And for each one of us, it could be a different picture for who we think is ideal for us. Now, it might be something to do with qualifications. It might be something to do with their experience. It might be something to do with their personality. But there's a gazillion other factors that you might come up with as well. Might be the particular musical style that they play. You're classical, you want someone who can do jazz or pop, or it could be when they're, when they're able to take on students. Can they only take beginners? Can they take students of all different levels? There's so many different ways of describing your ideal teacher. The most common ones that you'll see advertised are about qualifications and experience. But I'd strongly recommend you think about the personality side a lot, and also things like their ability to communicate. And when you actually get to a point of interviewing somebody, whether that's on the phone or on Zoom or face-to-face, then their ability to understand what you're asking for and communicate to you can be reflected in how they would communicate when they're teaching. So there's all those different components that you want to make a little bit of a checklist for. Say, well, I'd really like these particular qualities in my teacher that I'm going to hire. And obviously you're going to try and check off all of those for your first teacher. Now, the what is about what it is that you want them to teach. So what instrument will they teach? What level will they teach? What format do you want them to teach? All of those types of things. And then the curriculum, which is absolutely vital, needs to be considered as well. So when it comes to things like curriculum, my experience in the past has been that some teachers will be very set in how and what they want to teach. And if you are asking them to teach a different curriculum or a different style of teaching, a different delivery, then even if they say that, oh yes, I'm willing to do anything, you may find there'll be some teachers who really can't get out of their comfort zone of what they do. So when you have an inkling that there's a teacher who may not be flexible in how they teach, then you need to be thinking carefully about, well, is that one of the key things to employing this particular teacher? Or is there room to maneuver because they're so exceptional in every other area? So that's the what. What are they going to be teaching? The when factor, logistically, it can vary. You might be very flexible because you've got available location for them to teach. You might be very inflexible because you're sharing a studio and they can only teach when you're not in that studio. So you need to consider the logistics of what days you want them to teach, what hours you want them to teach. And then in the longer term, you need to think about, do you want them to teach in school holidays? Do you want them to teach on public holidays? Or are you going to stick with school terms? The where factor is, where will they be teaching from? So anything to do with that location, including the equipment, needs to be dreamed and designed. And it's very important that you consider the resources that you are going to provide as against things that you expect them to provide. It's all about clarity, and that's something that I've found over the years is extra important when it comes to the first interactions that you have with potential teachers. You need to be super clear on what it is that you are asking for, whether that be the fact that you can only have somebody who can teach on a Monday and that they have to be able to teach from beginners through to grade 5 level, and they have to provide their own computer. So if you spell that out right up front, then you will hopefully only get potential teachers who can fit those criteria. If you leave the door too wide open, you can get swamped with people who then sidetrack you in the process of trying to sort out who is the best person for you. And there's nothing worse than sitting there with 100 resumes or 100 applications and trying to figure out what the shortlist should be. And then when you get the shortlist, you've got to go through the interviews and so on. You really make a rod for your own back if you don't try and narrow down the focus as much as you can. And then, of course, there's the why, right in the middle. Why do you want them to teach? And as we covered before, that's really imperative to know, because that's going to really make the difference as to who you choose in the end. So then when we get to building, so we've dreamed it, we've designed it, we've figured out which days and who and what and where and all those things. Now we have to start looking at the nitty-gritty, legalistic type stuff of how is it going to work. And when we talk about policies, this is where it's very much about you letting the teacher know how it's going to work from your perspective, what your expectations are, but also what you expect them to do. And again, it's all about making this open and above board to any potential teacher so that it doesn't come back to hit you in the face later. It's no good having them on board for a few months and then turning around and saying, oh, but I expect you to work every school holidays, when they've got young family at home that they need to be home looking after, or something along those lines. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. That's a very obvious type of example. So the sorts of policies that I've listed down here, and there's quite a few of them, and some of them are quite huge, but just to run through them reasonably quickly. The booking management is the first one I've listed there. So that is basically saying who is going to look after the timetable. Now, initially, you're enrolling students for your teacher. That's the usual expectation. You're in charge of the admin if it's just you and this is your first teacher, unless you have admin staff at some point who might be taking on that role. Now, that teacher then is merrily teaching the student, usually on a weekly basis. The student then says, I can't come to my lesson next week, but I can come later in the week. Can I change my lesson date? Now, who is going to look after that? Is the teacher responsible for changing it, or are you responsible for changing that? If the student calls you and you have that ability to make those changes on the timetable for the teacher, you then have to remember to let the teacher know. And when it comes to timetables, you really have to be looking after your teachers in the same way that you might look after yourself. So you don't want them to have huge gaps in the middle of their afternoon of teaching or the middle of their day of teaching, if you can prevent it. So most commonly, a music school owner will manage the bookings and the makeup lessons and rescheduling for their teachers. And we're lucky these days that we have technology that can assist the music school owner in that management. So you don't have to be answering the phone or emails to every single student. You can use a software package to actually run your timetable for you, and that can be linked in with your payment system and so forth. So set up your policies. Who's going to look after bookings? Now, communications with students is a slightly tricky one. So again, are you going to say to your teachers that they are not to give out their phone number, they are not to give out their email address, and they are not to communicate directly with students at any time, so that you can keep all of the contact details of your students private? Or are you going to enable your teachers to make contact with students either for lesson planning or homework, or whether it might be to do with rescheduling of lessons? Are you going to allow those sorts of things? And there's reasons why you would and reasons why you wouldn't. But again, you could use technology to help you get around that. So some technology, some software packages will enable the teachers to communicate with the students within the software without the students giving away their contact details. But it's usually the more expensive packages that will do that. Makeups and cancellations, illness and relief of teachers, all of these things need to have a clear message. If a teacher is sick, who do they contact? Do they contact you and you contact the students? Or do they contact the students? Does the teacher find a relieving teacher to take their lessons without you even having to be in the loop? There's all these different possibilities and probably more as well. So you want to think about how you want that to be managed if your teacher is unable to teach. What sort of notification time do you expect them to give? A bit like your makeup and cancellation policies for students, where you might say you've got to give me 24 or 48 hours notice before you can cancel a lesson and expect not to pay for it. It could be that you say to your teachers, by 9 a.m. on the day of your lessons, I need to know if you're not coming in. Or it could be 24 hours or whatever. Do you want your teachers having holidays in the middle of the term? Is that a policy that you want to put into your contract to say you can only take holiday times in school holidays? Or is your system flexible enough to allow for those lessons to be rescheduled? What is your policy going to be if a teacher decides that, for whatever reason, that they don't want to continue teaching in your music school? How much notice do you want, and how do you want to be notified? Most commonly, people ask for a resignation to be in writing of some sort, and most commonly there is a requirement of a certain amount of time that they have to give you before they can expect to actually stop their teaching. You have to be reasonable in that though, so don't set unrealistic expectations and say you've got to give me 6 months notice before you can stop teaching, because that's just not going to work. So again, you need to just apply these things to what your expectation would be if you were in their sort of place. Make it all reasonable and doable. Now, there's other things like the lessons themselves. Do you want your teachers to be recording attendance? Do you want them to be sending home homework or lesson notes, or writing down some sort of student progress document so that you have a record, as well as the students having a record of what's actually transpiring in the lessons, so that you can actually monitor the progress of those students without physically being in the lessons? Now, when I write merchandise, it's a very broad term, but whenever I put that, it's to do with any sorts of teaching resources, whether it's an instrument, equipment, or most commonly the music books that students might need to use throughout their lessons. So if you have a teacher working for you, then what are you going to do in terms of providing those students that work with that teacher with those sorts of resources? You might be set up already with accounts that you can purchase the books and so forth for your students that you use, and you can then just extend it to these other students, and you therefore ask your teacher to forward that information to you to organise to purchase and request payment from the students for those resources. There's lots of different ways you might handle that. Or you might not want to deal with that at all, and you just let the teacher organise that however they wish to do. And there's everything in between as well. And then we come down to things like exams and exam enrolments. Who's going to manage that and do that? Is it going to be you, or are your teachers going to do individual enrolments themselves? So it really depends on whether you want to be seen as having all of these students coming from your studio on those exam slips. Things like that do make an impact. What's your policies when it comes to performances? Do you put on perhaps an annual concert and you would like to have every single student in your studio perform at the concert? Is that your policy? And therefore your teachers have to prepare every single student and make sure that they are organised in time. And do those teachers have to attend those performances and so forth? Is there going to be money being handled in lessons? Do the teachers have to collect money for books or for exam payments or for the lessons themselves? Again, it might be something that is not relevant to you, but there might be a component of that that is. And then finally, what are your policies for paying your teachers? When are you going to pay them? Are you going to pay them every week? That becomes a bit of a burden for you to have to manage every week with the time and the reviewing of all the documentation to get the correct payments, perhaps even tax payments and so forth. Or is it going to be every fortnight? Excuse me. Or is it going to be every month? Or there might be some other way that you haven't figured out. So teachers will always want to know, excuse me, about when they're going to get paid. Excuse me, frogs come into my throat. So anything to do with teacher payments, the when, the how much, all of those details, whether they get paid for performances, whether they get paid for any additional tasks that they do, all of those need to be clearly written out. Now, in the same way, the procedures of how you're going to manage all of these things, of how you are looking after all of the other students that this teacher is actually teaching on your behalf, these procedures are best if they are documented. So I would strongly encourage everybody right from the get-go to start writing down as simple as just dot points every part of the procedure that you go through, so that you can then replicate it the next time that you want to hire a teacher, whether that's a replacement teacher or because you're expanding. It also means that you have a good paper trail. So if ever something pops up, if a teacher says to you, oh, but you told me this in the interview, I don't have to attend performances, that you're going to do it all, and I just prepare them for performances. If you've got it documented in your job description and in your advertising and in everything else, and you can pull that out and go, look, here is what we discussed, you must have misunderstood, then it's also a benefit to have things documented. So the sorts of procedures and documentation that I suggest you start with are, firstly, the job description. Now, the job description is very much all that stuff we were talking about right back at the beginning of the who, what, when, where, and why. So job description could be starting with, you want a fully qualified bachelor degree or an A+ A level, or you want somebody who's got 10 years of performance experience, whatever it is in terms of qualifications or experience. You want them to be able to teach particular levels, particular instruments on particular days, and the location is going to be in this suburb. They need to provide X, Y, and Z. So you need to have all those bits of information detailed into a job description. Now, back in the day when we were running multiple music schools and school programs, I used to interview sometimes a dozen teachers in a morning, and it was very helpful to have the job description sitting there for the person who came in. They could sit there and read it through. They could read through any contracts or any information before you actually start an interview process. And it actually really made the process of talking with them a lot quicker, because they would already have their head around what it is that you are asking for much more clearly when you have a good job description written. And that would then lead them to ask the more detailed questions on the spot the first time, rather than having to have multiple conversations. It's a real good short circuit having a good job description. In the same way, the advertising that you put out there needs to be, although really, really compressed and very concise, it needs to be honing in on the very, very important things, the things you can't compromise on. Must be available only on a Monday, that type of thing. Must be able to teach up to, grade 8 level on saxophone, whatever it might be. So the advertising procedure of the actual ads, you want to keep track of those so you've got them for the future, but also where you place the ads. So how do you place the ads and where do you place the ads? And it's even a good practice to write down how much they cost, so that next time around you can look at those things and you can look at the responses you've had and said, well, I spent $300 and put an ad on Seek and I only got 2 applicants, but I spent no money on Facebook, posted it in lots of groups, and I had a gazillion applicants. So these sorts of bits of information are really helpful for the future as well. Now, the interview process is an interesting one. Some people might like to just do it on the fly, and other people, like myself, like to have a little bit of a checklist of what are the important things that you want to ask, so that you can't get too sidetracked. It's okay to get sidetracked at times. You can learn a bit more about the personality and so forth of the interviewee if you get sidetracked occasionally. But having an interview process where you will start out by asking them some basic background, get them to describe to you their experience, and then give them a few questions along the lines of, well, how would you handle this situation? What would you do if the student started playing like this? How would you improve their playing? Or what do you feel about this sort of technique or that sort of method? Or whatever questions are going to get to the point of what are the important things that you're looking for. Now, you can have as many of these questions printed out or noted down beforehand, and you may get through all of them or only some of them, but you can soon start to get a really good instinct as to what the teachers are about, what their priorities are, if you're asking those right questions. Now, the hiring process itself is where you get to the point of offering that work to a teacher. And at that point, you might have a couple of teachers, 2 or 3 even, who you think might be a good fit, but you've decided on one in particular. Now, until that particular teacher has accepted and signed off on it, then generally what happens is you will keep those other 2 people in the loop as potentials in case that first choice has gone elsewhere or changed their mind or thought about it for some reason it's not a good fit. And that way you haven't burnt all your bridges by telling everybody else, no, I don't want you, I've got this other person. it's always nicer if you appear to be the first person in the queue when it comes to being hired for a position. So contracts and paperwork. Contracts are really quite important, but they need to be simple and they need to be something that can be enforced. There's no good writing a contract yourself and saying, as I had with my example before, you need to give 6 months lead time if you want to resign, because there is no legal precedent for that. It's not enforceable. So realistically, the best way is to actually get a lawyer to sit down and write you a contract, or find a template of somebody who has had a lawyer write things down in such a way that you will be able to enforce any of the points that are important to you. Things like, not following through with photocopies. You want them to make sure that they're complying with all of the regulations. And in this day and age with COVID and so forth, there's probably a need to put in a clause that they will maintain the required obligations of COVID with sanitization, etc., etc. So you probably have to add in things like this to your contracts, as well as the obvious thing of what their responsibilities are. Your job description sort of morphs into your contract as well, because they sign off on the contract to say, yes, I agree that I will prepare students for performances, I will prepare students for exams, I will enroll students for exams, I will not share my contact details, I will not come to work drunk, or I will not smoke in the music studio, whatever it might be. Those sorts of things are signed off on a contract. In addition, you want them to provide various bits of paperwork for you. So there's the obvious things like either a VIT registration or a working with children check, or whatever is applicable to your particular state. But there will also potentially be things like, or there will definitely be things like requiring their bank details so that you can pay them, because they usually like to get paid, and superannuation details, because it's a requirement these days that you will need to pay superannuation if you have an employee or a contractor, and so on and so forth. So you will need to get some paperwork from them, as well as getting them to sign off on a contract. And all of those things can take a bit of time. So it's very important that you give your potential teacher the time to look over a contract, and if needs be, they might need to consult a family member, or if they want to get a lawyer to look at it, then that might need to happen. So you'll have to put a time limit on that, and a time limit on when you need their paperwork, so that they can start their teaching with everything set up, ready to go, and you know that it's a definite thing. You don't get left with a teacher pulling out at the last minute because they decided they didn't like the clause about photocopying in the contract or something. Now, the other things to really make sure you're clear on is what you're going to provide for your teacher. And it can sometimes be something that attracts teachers to you. I've certainly had many teachers over the years who have found that when they've come to teach in my music school, the fact that I provide them with a whole heap of training, so not just resources, but I've done face-to-face training in all sorts of different ways, or online training in the last 5-10 years, providing them with teaching resources to use, and obviously your commitment to them and being able to mentor them, all those types of things are great value to newer teachers, or teachers who are coming back into the system, or perhaps they're taking up a second instrument that they're teaching. So they can be very valuable to the teachers coming to you. It can attract more teachers to you, but you also want to make sure that they're aware of what the expected commitment is on their behalf. So how much time would you expect them to commit to training, and what sort of content is that going to be involved? So you'll want to spell that out, and also obviously keep track for your own documentation of exactly what they do and what that content is. When it comes to management, then we're talking about what you need to do to make everything run smoothly, and also what you need to do to make sure that what they're actually teaching is according to your expectations. And that can happen in a whole lot of different ways. You might sit in on the occasional lesson. You might survey the students and parents. You might do a formal sit-down self-appraisal and mentor appraisal. All sorts of different ways, but you need to have these procedures in place. The payment system we talked about briefly before. How and when are you going to pay your teachers? But you want to have it all documented. So from 1 week or 1 fortnight or 1 month to the next, your procedures are in place so that you can just go, right, now I just need to check their attendance. Now I need to multiply that by how many dollars per hour, and then I have to transfer it here, and then I have to note it in there, and it's all done. You don't have to scratch your head thinking, now what else did I have to do? Relief teachers, again, briefly mentioned earlier, but it's worthwhile thinking about this in advance of hiring your first teacher. If you think you want to have a relief teacher coming in, you'll need to have some documentation to give them for when they come in, so that they can follow through with your expectations and systems. And then similarly, for a teacher who resigns, what is the process of them being removed from your studio? Who tells the students? How long is the expectation of how long will they continue teaching? What happens with the resources and equipment, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole heap of information there. I'm sorry you've been staring at that screen for a very long time. This one will be much quicker. Once you've set up that teacher, they've done their paperwork, they've done their training, they're ready to go, that's when you start actually going beyond all of the living, and you're actually starting to share your studio. But living the recruitment process is when you are placing the ads, you are sorting through, selecting and interviewing your applicants, you're hiring them, so you're making that phone call, you're taking them through some training, you're supervising them, and you're paying them. So you're setting up all of these things, and then you get to that point of sharing everything in your studio, the enrollments, the programs, the performances, the successes that you have on both sides. You welcome their ideas, you make them part of your music studio, you show that you value them. That's really, really important. And that's when it starts to really click and gel. Now, some tips for you. I have had this system for a long time of when I'm doing a bit of a dreaming session or a planning session, of using a 1-page business plan. And what you can see on the screen is just one example of many, where you write down how it looks now, so how your teaching looks now, how you want it to look. These are the top 2 boxes. So that goes from what you're currently looking like, and then your dream of what you want it to be like. And then down the bottom are the steps that you write down, the strategies, the action, who's going to be responsible, and some dates of all the different steps to get you from the box on the left of how your teaching business looks now to how you want it to be higher up that music school success level. So that's a really quick little easy way of doing a business plan. And as I mentioned earlier, document, put things into a manual. Because if you decide to grow up that success ladder and hire multiple teachers and open multiple locations, then the more you have got systemized and written down, the easier it is for you. And if you start handing over any of the admin tasks, then you've already got half of the training done. When you're writing any sort of manual, a simple little template of, again, what it is, how to do it, and who's going to do it is really helpful to then putting together all those procedures we talked about before. And then just towards the end here, things to avoid: not having clear descriptions of things like the job description, or not sharing them early enough with applicants, not having a simple binding contract, or not allowing your applicants time to peruse these things. These are things to avoid because they just cause problems. Beware of those teachers who say, yes, I can do everything, and yes, I can do it anytime you want, and yes, I will do everything in the world. I will travel 3 hours for half an hour's work. Some teachers will say anything to get that job, and then they will find, and it's because they think they do want it, but then after a very short period of time, they'll find it's just not a workable scenario. So be careful of teachers in those sorts of situations. Teachers who believe they don't need training. Watch out for those who go through your contract and start to pull apart every tiny little detail. It shows a certain amount of not quite matching up if they're going to be very picky about all of those details in your contract. It's fine for them to ask for clarification. It's fine to ask you to explain why you've got that particular clause there even. But if they start saying, well, what about this one? And can we change that one? And I think this needs to be different. Then you haven't got a good match. If you hire a teacher whose personality or philosophy doesn't match yours, chances are you're going to rub one another up the wrong way, and it's going to be a difficult working relationship. You have to consider that. And be careful about hiring just the best of a bad bunch because you think you have to. Sometimes that ideal teacher is just around the corner, and you just have to be a little bit more patient. Now, finally, before we go to our questions, I hope I haven't kept you too long. I wanted to let you know that if you wanted to get a copy of my book, I've got a special offer for you to get it for $1 plus postage. Jump onto my website, wendysmusic.com.au, and look for the book Music Teaching Made Profitable. And you'll find that that has got lots of explanation, lots more detail of things we've talked about tonight, and lots of other areas as well. So thank you so much for all of your patience as I have rattled away through all of that. How are we going for any questions? Kevin, are you still awake?